Yes.
Okay, for over 40 years, Dr. Anne Dranitsaris has been helping individuals, couples, leaders, and entrepreneurs break free from limiting beliefs, codependence, imposter syndrome, and other patterns that hold them back from living as their authentic selves. Through her work as a psychotherapist, leadership coach, and behavioral change expert, she's had the privilege of guiding countless people on their journeys to discover their true potential and lead lives aligned with who they're meant to be. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, of course, absolutely. And I'm a huge fan of your writings. I think I first came across your work on LinkedIn, and I've just read so much of your work. I'm such a big fan of it. So can we talk a little bit about, well, let's get into a bit about the primary work that you do in general, actually, if you don't mind.
Well, it's such a broad question, and so if I can go right down to the kernel of why I do what I want to do is that
Yes.
it really moves me to help people achieve their potential. And if I look at some of my own unique abilities, it's being able to talk to a person and see not only what their potential is, but how they're getting in their own way and what are the limiting beliefs and habits and the things that they're bringing along from childhood or their adult life that they actually keep getting in the way of really living on purpose. And not everybody has a purpose like I want to be a rocket scientist or some of us, it's more simple that our purpose is just to help people along their path, or our purpose is to provide, a place to grow and develop, to nurture a family. We all have a purpose in this life, but we also have the ability to demean and diminish and devalue it, getting stuck in thoughts like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, I'm not talented enough to really say anything or go after my dreams. So I'm just going to do what other people want. So a long-winded way of saying I help people achieve their potential through a variety of modalities, through workshops, through psychotherapy, through leadership coaching, through couples therapy, and through my writing of books and articles.
That's wonderful. Your writing is incredible. And this is just my perspective, Dr. Dranitsaris, but one of your articles really stood out to me because, in my opinion, this issue is not spoken about enough. And you did a beautiful article on it, and possibly more. If I could ask you about if you could define what covert narcissism is. I know that you write about this in some of your articles, and I don't find that I find that there's a lot of misinformation, not proper information about that, and you're basically spot on in my opinion with your analysis. And so, can you describe a little bit about what that is?
Well, and to set that up, most of the time we look at narcissists, quote unquote, narcissists as the bad guys. They're the
Right.
ones who are always victimizing somebody in a relationship or in the workplace. And the reality of this is that we during our childhood development, there's a stage called the narcissistic stage of development where we discover that there is an I, and I am the center of my universe, and everybody and everything in my environment is there to meet my needs. And if we successfully navigate this, we move on to the next stage of development. If we don't, we can go either way. We can go being overt and always seeking to get that recognition and approval, in fact, demanding that we get it and showing up in that way that's traditionally associated with a narcissist.
Yes.
When it's covert, we become people's helper, and we gain recognition and status by attaching ourselves to a narcissist. And so it's like this perfect fit between the covert and the overt in a relationship, where you have the one who looks like they're behaving really badly and only thinking about themselves, but the covert narcissist then becomes a victim. And that's a very powerful energy because people rally around victims to help them and support them and to understand their trauma and listen to the pain and the suffering that they're going through, never thinking, well, why did you get into this relationship and why didn't you leave them? Of course, I'm oversimplifying. People get
Yes.
hurt in
Yes.
relationships, but with the covert narcissist, they hold on because they believe, unconsciously or consciously, that their way of being safe and psychologically secure is through their narcissistic partner. So they're like the silent partner. And
Interesting.
yes,
Interesting. And is that, maybe we could talk a little bit about this because the word enabler comes to mind. Is that
yes.
is that often what the primary enabler, whether it's a parent or at work or in any type of situation, is the primary enabler of the main narcissist often a covert narcissist?
Absolutely, because you look at the skill set of the covert narcissist. If you look at things like, I caretake my narcissistic partner, I listen to them, I do their housework I do their finances for them. Sometimes I actually support them financially. I worry about them. I anticipate their needs. And so all of these abilities and skills that the covert narcissist has, gets streamed into building up the narcissist or their children when it comes to enabling them. And it doesn't go into developing themselves. And so the covert narcissists, for example, they're notorious for not saying, I have this talent and I can do this for myself, or I need this. They put the needs up first.
That's very, very interesting. This something comes to mind. I have absolutely no data on this whatsoever, but it kind of comes to mind. I wonder if you'd see a lot of this in helping professions. I wonder, the bad guys in the helping professions. May that comes to mind with that. To be honest with you. Wow. No, you're one of the few people I have heard accurately describe that phenomenon. Now, if someone's reading your work and saying, "Hey, wait a minute, I've done that. That's me." I take it you would not be a covert narcissist. That would be something that you could start to change.
Yeah, I really want people to think of this as this isn't a character flaw. This is a developmental failure.
Right.
Think of it as a grade that we should have failed it, but and gone back and done the work of it, but we didn't. We moved to the next grade and kept developing beyond that. And so we keep trying to satisfy these needs that never got satisfied because the covert narcissist gets attention by being helpful, by
Yeah.
being supportive, by doing all of these things for narcissistic people or even for other people. And then they also have a very difficult time taking in compliments or taking praise in because they don't want the attention focused on them when really they are entitled to it. And those are those distinguishing factors between the covert and the overt narcissist also, is that one has a really deflated sense of self and the other has an inflated sense of self. So the narcissist, I'm great, I'm amazing, I'm wonderful. And the covert is saying, yes, they're great, they're wonderful, but I'm not really, you see? And so these people, to your point about caretakers, you see, they have a natural talent and ability before being in the helping professions. I know this one really well. You see, I was stuck in this wound as well. And it is a wound, and it can be healed, and we can move on from it.
Can we talk a little bit about that? Is that some of the work that you do?
That is some of the work that I do. And one of the ways I distinguish myself as a therapist is that just don't look at, there are many types of therapy, and I was trained in a number of different approaches. But psychodynamic therapy is when we go back into childhood and look at the patterns that developed as a result of conditioning, the self-protective patterns. But I also look at personality type and the predominant needs that drive an individual's behavior. And from then, with, exploring the wounds and empathizing with the wounds and attuning to that and helping the person recognize and do things that can heal their childhood wounds so they don't keep bringing them into the present. From there, the next stage is going into how to behave differently and take responsibility for one's gifts and take responsibility for one's own behavior, because too often we've developed up an identity of being a victim and we don't know how to break out of it. We don't want to, nobody wants to be seen as a victim.
No.
But a lot of people are more likely to complain about their lives and feel powerless to do anything about it when they're just afraid or they don't know how to do something about it. And so it's the working through with more cognitive behavior therapy during the next, phase of therapy. So first stage is uncovering the patterns and the wounds. And the next is that reparation and changing the brain and changing the automatic habits, beliefs, and patterns of behavior that get in the way of achieving potential.
Thank you very much. Doctor, I understand that a book can never take place of actual solid psychotherapy and work, but is the book that you're writing, I'm not sure if it's completed yet, very, very happy for you, is the book that you're completing about this as well? Can we talk a little bit about your book?
Well, the last book I wrote was, it's called Become Who You're Meant to Be in Relationships. And years ago, my partner, my business partner and daughter, Heather, we wrote a book called Who Are You Meant to Be? And one of the realizations that was it, and it's very clear, people don't know what to do the work. And you see exercises online, but you don't, say, for example, if I told you, well, just be more confident or just be more assertive, go and say that. And it's all of these feelings come up and, in your head that you want to, but you just can't bring yourself to say what's needed to be said for fear of the consequences. And it really does take affirmations. It takes mindfulness. It takes awareness of, what the payoff is for not growing. All of these things are really important. And so what I did was I decided I was going to put together a few books on how to develop assertiveness and all of the practices. I have 30 practices for each of the symptoms that I've identified that most get in the way of relationships. And so people can actually look at this and say, well, I do need to develop more self-awareness, or I really do need to stop personalizing everybody's behavior and think everyone's behavior is about me. And so, but how do I do that? And so okay, well, here you have a full menu of exercises that you can go to and say, okay, I'm going to practice this for a month and I'm going to see how I grow from there. And yes, we grow in relationship with others. So either having a therapist or having a practice partner, having a friend that you both say, we're really low assertive. We need to do something about this now. except complain to each other. Why don't we both practice over the next month?
Amazing. And do your workshop sort of offer a bit of a structured way of doing that? How do you set your workshops up, if you don't mind
So
me asking?
for example, the workshops on imposter syndrome and codependency, for example, they start with the pre-work, like that starting with where are you now and how have you gotten here? And that you're coming to the workshop really predisposed to talk about yourself and how it is you believe you got to where you are and what your main barriers to moving forward are. And from there we look at, limiting beliefs and why they're working for you and what the payoff is. And then we look at, what fears you need to let go of in order to move forward and what needs to be in place. And then most importantly, we create a development plan with milestones because, again, the brain takes time to change, and people complain about how hard it is to change. But really, it's very hard to stay in the same place for years. It's very, very painful for people. But that's what the brain does. It keeps repeating these same painful patterns. And even though in relationship, for example, we can say, oh, I just met this guy. He's amazing. He's wonderful. He's so different than anyone I've ever talked to, have been with before. And all of a sudden, you're in the same pattern with this person because we bring the same relationship pattern. And so working through this over a period of time and giving the brain enough time to change is really critical. So at the end of the workshop, people are set up with accountability partners. So they leave the workshop with someone they can check in with, and they can always work with me going forward if they want to do that following the workshop. Monthly checkups, biweekly checkups, whatever it is they want to do.
That's amazing. Do you offer these in person, online? Can anybody take them? That's amazing.
Anyone can take them. At this time, I'm doing them online because of my location.
Of course.
And what I like to do is because the setup for the workshop is really important. What I'll do is I'll have a pre-session before the actual session, so that we can come together and people are really teed up to get the most out of the workshop and to really get a sense of you're just not coming to listen and learn. You are coming to have an experience of yourself and listen to other people struggling and get people to support you going forward.
Thank you very much. I just have a question for you, if you don't mind, if I could get your opinion on this, because it does seem to come up quite a bit, and I'm genuinely curious as to people's opinions on this. But say somebody has gone to you and has done a ton of work and grown and become a healthier person, or just never had issues with codependency or in their past, and they're in, say, a group environment, whether it's a sorority or it's a workplace, and these types of dynamics are very prevalent. Are you better off to leave that environment if you are subjected to that on a daily or even weekly basis? I mean, that's not something that's probably going to change if your coworkers, for instance, are engaged in these dynamics, or your boss. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there is a certain amount of accepting of what we can do,
Right.
um, especially in situations where we have an employer whose behavior is, um, we find it shaming or bullying, or they just don't. They create a chaotic environment, and
Mhm.
or the team is allowed to form cliques, and
Right.
the cliques gang up and bully, you see. And that if you make an attempt at a conversation to say this work environment can be improved by X, Y, and Z if these behaviors were stopped, and nothing is done about it, you're better off leaving and picking your battles. Some people can't do that, however. But this is where being able to depersonalize the behavior of others comes in, that lots of people behave very badly. And it's not because of who you are, it's because of who they are.
That's so important to remember, even for
So
myself.
important.
It's like
Yes.
9 times out of 10, my immediate reaction is that there's something I've done or something is wrong with me. And absolutely, it's very important to remember that.
Yes, because we think that, and we like to use ourselves as the benchmark for how other people feel and how they'll behave. And if I'm a good person, I'm trying very hard to be open and empathetic and accommodating. And then all of a sudden you get people who are just mean and exclusive, and they're doing things like that. And it's shocking. And that's where that narcissistic reaction, it's got to be about me. You
Mhm.
see, when we self-refer in that way, and then any messages from childhood, any messages you see from our nervous system, they can be thrown. Oh, this is just like that time in high school when none of the girls liked me. This was just like with my siblings and my mother didn't. There are any number of things that can come up. And so once we've attached the past to it, it's got even more power than just the actual instance. So really thinking, and this is where coaching comes in, where, some of my clients, they learn to say things like, you excluded me, that hurt my feelings. Was that intentional? Instead of, oh, I did something wrong. I better act differently, and so they'll like me more. That never works. It
Interesting.
never works. Yeah.
Do do you often feel that it works to address the problem with the other person, or again, as you said, maybe pick your battles with that?
Well, it's not seeing it as a problem per se. It's just
Mhm.
naming. It's just
Right.
putting a label on. Yesterday I saw that, everyone was invited to lunch except for me. In going forward, I'd really appreciate being included. If it happens again, then you call it out again. You see
Right.
that, I had asked to be included. Is there a reason? And so it's always kept outside. It's always kept outside. It's never, they must not like me, you see, because people have their own agenda for exclusion. And sometimes what happens is the most competent, the most effective, and particularly with groups of women, the most business minded are the ones that tend to be bullied by other women because they're
Interesting.
not conforming to the social norm of that group.
Right. Interesting. Very, very interesting. And I completely agree with that in my experience. Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Yeah.
Now, and if you don't mind me asking, just because I actually don't know what the real definition of this is. I know what I think it's used to describe as, but could we talk about imposter syndrome and what that is and how you help people with that issue?
Imposter syndrome has basically become a pretty much a dumping ground for all kinds of symptoms that we can say.
Yes.
You see, whenever I doubt myself, I must have imposter syndrome. Whenever I don't feel confident or assertive, I must, or and this comes from having unrealistic expectations of ourselves as well. But it's also a place where people can, we develop into a certain persona. And this happens throughout our childhood where the expectations of how we are supposed to behave or the trauma or the chaos of our home environment was so disruptive to our development that we did everything that we could do to conform. And what that does is energetically, it causes all of our energy into developing this persona that is pleasing and acceptable to the outer world, and the development of our authentic self gets thwarted. So, we have two different agendas. One is to survive and one is to self-actualize. And the agenda to survive becomes stronger. And you can see that split and the distance between who I actually am authentically and what I need and want, and what I have become in order to be loved and not abandoned or rejected. And so when we're stuck in that imposter persona, we're only as good as our last movie, basically. It's like we have to keep seeking approval and keep getting validation outside of ourselves in order to feel okay about ourselves. So in essence, anyone who is stuck in that place of development can probably be thrown into the bucket of having some degree of imposter syndrome.
Thank you.
Because in fact, that persona is an imposter. It is not the real person inside.
Right.
Right? They're not
Right.
saying what they really
Right.
want to say. They're not, even a simple, where do you want to go for dinner? Or what movie would you like to see? Oh, don't worry about me. You pick. You see, it simple things in life become ways of, I don't need anything. I'm not a burden to anybody. I am here to serve other people.
Thank you for that explanation. That makes a lot of sense and was very thorough. Thank you. I Perfect. It was amazing. Um, Dr. Dranitsaris, before I let you go here, can I ask can I ask how people can work with you, or are you taking clients still, or what do you have coming up?
Well, I am still taking clients. I don't take too many clients at this point in time because I like to spend most of my time writing. But I do some coaching, leadership coaching, and psychotherapy clients. I'm not a registered psychotherapist. Interestingly, the psychotherapy college in Ontario came into being a lot of years after I was already practicing, and I just decided not to opt into that structure.
Right.
And so people who come to me are really serious about their development because, of course, it's on their own dime. The other thing I am doing is in the fall, I'm doing workshops on imposter syndrome and codependence starting in October. And there'll be small groups. I like to have groups of only 6 to 8 people because that gives people time to really be heard and seen and have their issues come to the forefront in the group, and they can get some real help in creating their development plan during the group and afterwards as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yes.
And is there a way that people can sign up for your newsletter or continue to follow the work you're doing or purchase your book? Where is the best place that people can go to
So all of
look
my
at your work?
books are on Amazon.ca
Okay.
or Amazon.com, and they can go to my website. My information is there, and I'm also going to be putting up a workshop in August. I'll be putting up the workshops I'm going to be offering in October. My newsletter page is also on my website. I write articles for LinkedIn. So if they want to connect with me on LinkedIn, they can do that as well. And I also have another book coming out in October on the history of codependency. A hundred codependency from the 1920s right through to the 2020s, and how it was looked at and how far we've come relative to divorcing it from alcohol and seeing it as a developmental delay.
I'm so excited to
Yes.
to dig into that. I will be so excited to get myself a copy. Everyone needs to get a copy of that. That's amazing. And I'll say a proper goodbye to you after we stop recording here, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time today to educate myself and my audience. You do amazing work. Everybody needs to go to your LinkedIn and check out your articles, because that's how I found you, and you do some just wonderful work. Thank you so much.
Well, and thank you so much for having me. And as we talked about earlier, it's so wonderful to connect with someone who lives in the same area.
Me too. You're the first, I think. So it's very exciting. Thank you.
Truly.
Thank you. So it really is. Thank you so much. And I hope to have you
My
back.
pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.